Okay, so yeah, when you were talking a little while ago, you mentioned war in Cameroon, and to prepare for the show, you kind of taught me, uh, you dropped an acronym on me that I had to later on go and research. You said IDP, which I learned was an internally displaced person or internally displaced population or internally displaced people, and I kind of want to know what role did the 2017 Cameroon Civil War play in the growing number of IDPs today in Cameroon?
So yes, in 2016, due a direct result of colonization and enslavement, a part of Cameroon, the Northwest and the Southwest split along language. And you would even think, right, that this will be an African language, right? And I mean, no war is needed, but when a war or a conflict is around a colonial entity, it's like mind blown, right? So there is a colonial language split, which the war in Cameroon, just like every other war across Africa, is directly linked to to the colonial oppressive past
Hmm.
and enslavement. And so there is an English speaking minority. Again, this is not like South Africa or Zimbabwe or some other countries where they are like white people, right? No, these are like Cameroonians who speak English and Cameroonians who speak French, or fighting about marginalization and a botched colonial pact that took place 50 plus years ago, right, during quote unquote independence. And by 2017, as you mentioned, it became full blown war. It was an armed conflict, but that's not the only conflict in Cameroon, right? That's one of the Anglophone crisis, as it's now called, is one of 5 armed conflicts in Cameroon. You've heard of Boko Haram, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We have Boko Haram terrorists in the north of Cameroon, right? They come right across from Nigeria. Remember, these are all artificial borders, right? So
Mm.
when somebody's saying, oh, they come from Nigeria, they're practically the same people, the same Hausa people that the European oppressors just put down the line and divided us, right? So we have armed conflicts. We have, this year alone, we've had 250 plus killings by Boko Haram terrorists in the east of Cameroon. You've heard of the Central African Republics, Seleka and Antibakala terrorist groups. They are in the east of Cameroon. They've come into the east of Cameroon. And just to back on your IDPs and refugees question, the Boko Haram terrorists, they're refugees from Nigeria, come into Cameroon. So prior to 2016, we had about 1 million Nigerians who would rather come across to Cameroon than go down south. So those Nigerians from the north, from Zaria, Adamawa, and the northern parts of Nigeria, would rather come across to Cameroon than go down south to Lagos and Benin and Benin City and all of that. So we already had that going on. About 1 million Nigerian refugees. On the east, we had about more than 500,000 Central African refugees that already come into Cameroon, right? And so you have these two big crises. You have the Anglophone crisis that has displaced
Mm.
about 1 million Cameroonians, as well as those same refugees who are already in Cameroon has been displaced already. And then some of our Cameroonians have actually gone on the other side of Nigeria as refugees in states such as Taraba, Benue, and other states in the southeastern part of Nigeria. The 2 other armed conflicts, include 2018 presidential election, where the dictator President Biya, who has been in power before many, you talk about the growing population in Cameroon. President Biya has been in power for 37 years before many of us were even born, before more than half of Cameroon was even born, right?
Mhm.
37-year-old dictator in 2018 has an election and he quote unquote wins the election, right? That caused an armed conflict where he went after the opposition parties, killing some of them, and this led to a post-electoral armed conflict where he imprisoned about 300 of his opposition leaders, including a gentleman called Kamto, who is said to have won to have actually won that election in 2018. So that's the fourth armed conflict. The fifth armed conflict, which is not talked about, but for those of you who are from like Guinea, from Mali, from Nigeria, can relate to, is what is known as the herder-farmer conflict in the greater Sahel region. Again, due to those artificial boundaries, Cameroon and parts of Taraba and Benue that have had significant herder-farmer conflicts affect us in Cameroon. So along the border, in places such as Mbem, Mwa, there is a big, herder-farmer conflict where it goes into religion even, because a lot of the herders tend to be Mbororos, as we call them in Cameroon, or in other parts of Guinea and Liberia, they call them, Fulanis, and these Mbororos and Fulanis, my ancestral, that's how come my last name is Bello. My ancestors are from that community, tend to be Muslims, right? And then the farmers tend to be Christians. And so now with that herder-farmer conflict, it brings about a religious component to it, right? So that's the fifth underreported, but very, very significant crisis happening in Cameroon, is that Sahel, where the, Sahel conflict that is herder-farmer that goes into a cultural conflict in all of Cameroon, as well as now a religious conflict. So those are the 5 armed conflicts that have led to IDPs, the internally displaced people, as well as refugees, all the way to the border of America. So the refugees from those 5 armed conflicts are not just limited to Nigeria and displaced in Cameroon. It has pushed these Cameroonians all the way to the border right here in the US border in America.
Is the national government addressing this issue?
Perfect. So the answer to that is yes. Now, the response and the quote unquote address are different, right? A dictator addresses an issue with force, right? A dictator addresses an issue with imprisonment. A dictator addresses an issue with silence. So yes, in that regard, with people rising up to say we want more out of our government, we want more out of our land, the Cameroon government met those requests with brutality. So at the Cameroon American Council, what we did is that we went to the U.S. Government, we are in America, and said, hey, you support the Cameroon government in many things, which are great. The American government supports the Cameroon government when it comes to their partners in HIV, their partners in fighting Boko Haram terrorists. So we said, you are, you can be an intermediary for good. Can you get the Cameroon government to not use American military training, American funding to burn down 500 villages in the Northwest and Southwest? And with that, if folks, just put out Cameroon American Council Congress, you see that we were able to, together with other partners, get congressional resolutions on Cameroon, get not 1, but 2 congressional delegations to go to Cameroon to look at the situation up close. Unfortunately, again, to your question of response, when they got to Cameroon in 2018, that's Congressman Russell got to Cameroon in 2018, he's from Oklahoma. They were told you cannot go to those places. You can only stay in Yaoundé, right? When in 2019, just in May, a group of 7 members of Congress went to Cameroon at our request at the Cameroon American Council. They were told they cannot go into the Northwest and Southwest because they cannot guarantee their safety, which is very ironic because when a member of Congress travels, they have Secret Service with them. They have the military with them. The Cameroon government is telling members of Congress, we cannot guarantee your safety, even though you have all this equipment, all this specialized training. But then the Cameroon government has the nerve to ask children to go back to school. Right? So children that don't have the same security, don't have the same support system, and the Cameroon government is right now saying, there is no war, stop the war, go back to school, which, so that has been the response. Has it been adequate from either end? No. The American government can do more. You saw what happened in Hong Kong, right? Within a week or a couple of weeks of the people of Hong Kong going to the streets, Congress passed a resolution, or President Trump signed a resolution, right? Within weeks. So it tells you that when America wants to send a message that they will not tolerate, that they will not tolerate, uh, uh, you know, uh, blocks and barriers to freedom of speech, blocks and barriers to freedom of expression, they make it happen. For Cameroon, it's been 4 years and they've not. So they could do more. This year, you mentioned IDPs. This particular year, the United Nations, for its Africa Day, which Christelle can tell you more, right? Because Christelle, did an event for Africa Day at the UN. What was the UN's theme for this year? It said returnees and refugees. That was the theme. Returnees and refugees, right? So the UN is aware that for Africa, we have tremendous, levels of refugees and IDPs from, going towards Libya or coming to America, right? So what have they done about that? We know what they did when it was Syria. We know what the United Nations did for Syria. They held conferences, for those Syrian refugees. They held meetings. They put up money, for those Syrian refugees. What have they done for the refugees and the IDPs in Cameroon and across the country?